go back to the deadline and go inside the deadline and kind of revisit some of the things that have happened and some of the outcomes that already have taken place. You had some fan bases that were rather upset with the conduct of their teams, and understandably so. You had some teams that didn't do a whole lot. And I'm going to start off talking about two of those teams. Because both of these teams, while they didn't do a whole lot, they're actually coming out of this pretty well. The first of those is the Minnesota Twins. The Twins needed a right-handed hitter. They needed more bullpen help. And Aaron Gleeman of The Athletic wrote a scathing and appropriate column about their lack of activity at the deadline. Well, here are the Twins. They've won 5 of 6 since the deadline versus the Cardinals and the Diamondbacks. And the rest of the division, we know this, got weaker. Guardians traded Savali and Rosario. The Tigers traded Lorenzen. The Royals, Chapman and Barlow. And Nicky Lopez. And the White Sox, they traded everybody. So part of the Twins' lack of urgency was due to the fact that they knew the division was basically coming apart around them. And they knew that they'd be okay if their better players started performing well. We still haven't seen that, really, from Correa and Buxton. So much of what the Twins are built on depends on those guys. But they've gotten contributions from younger players, Wallner and Julian, some others. So the Twins are in a commanding position in the AL Central. Did they do enough to maybe win a round of the playoffs, which we haven't seen them do in a while? No, but they're in decent shape. Then there are the Mariners, a team that actually traded its closer for the second time in 3 years. Paul Sewald, he was the one who went this time. He went to the Diamondbacks. And they didn't do much else. Didn't trade Teoscar Hernandez. Didn't really buy at all. And you wonder, what the heck are the Mariners doing? Now, I know they got some pieces back for Sewald. Okay, I get it. But the Mariners were a team that people were wondering, what are they doing? They were in the playoffs last year for the first time in forever. And now they're just kind of sitting there stagnant? Well, the Mariners, they've won 5 of 6. They're in pretty good shape right now. And it goes to show you again that sometimes keeping it together is not such a bad thing. One more team I want to talk about before I get into some other stuff with some teams that have not fared as well. The Dodgers. Now, the Dodgers, as I wrote about last week, they didn't get Eduardo Rodriguez. They had a deal in place. He vetoed it, invoking his no-trade rights to that particular team. He had a 10-team no-trade list. They have pitching issues, and they were left with kind of a difficult spot because they had acquired some players, but none of them are impact players. I'm talking about Lance Lynn and Joe Kelly. I'm talking about Ahmed Rosario and Kike Hernandez. Didn't look like much, right? Lynn had the highest ERA in the majors, most home runs allowed in the majors. He has since made 2 really good starts for the Dodgers, one on Sunday Night Baseball against the Padres. Joe Kelly, he'll be a little up and down always, I guess, but he'll contribute to that bullpen. And Rosario and Hernandez have done exactly what the Dodgers wanted them to do, which was help their right-handed lineup. So these teams, while it seems like they didn't do a whole lot or didn't do all that they wanted, they still came out of it okay. But the real issue for me concerns teams that failed to get starting pitching help. And I guess the Dodgers would count in that group because they didn't get much or anything beyond Lance Lynn. But I'm really talking about the Reds. I'm talking about the Diamondbacks. The Braves to a certain extent, though they were really only looking for depth. And I'm talking about the Red Sox. I wrote about the Red Sox on Monday and Chaim Bloom's approach at the deadline. I know a lot of their fans are frustrated, and I understand where they're coming from. This is a team that, yes, it did not have great postseason chances, great odds at the time of the deadline, but they needed starting pitching, didn't get it. Now they've got Sale coming back and Trevor Story this week, Tanner Houck, Garrett Whitlock eventually. Okay. And if those guys stay healthy, in my view, the Red Sox still can be okay. But you needed starting pitching, you didn't get it. Same with the Reds, same with the Diamondbacks. Now, the one thing I will say on behalf of all of these teams, and the one thing that fans have a hard time maybe seeing because they're so focused on their own club, is that the market was indeed terrible. It was really thin on starting pitchers, and especially controllable starting pitchers, guys you can have for multiple years. Only one of them really was moved. I'm not counting the Mets' $43.3 million Twins Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer. They're in a separate category. Scherzer became a multi-year guy when he agreed not to opt out. Verlander did have a year left. They're different. They're so expensive, and those deals were so unusual, I don't really see them as controllable starting pitchers in the classic sense. The one that was traded was Aaron Savali. He went from Cleveland to Tampa Bay. Kind of a coup for Tampa Bay, but they gave up a really good prospect, Kyle Manzardo, to get him. And then there's Lance Lynn, who has an $18 million club option. He's controllable. I don't know, at the time of the trade, the Dodgers thought they'd ever pick up that option. They might be reconsidering that now. We'll see how that turns out. But those kinds of pitchers were not available. Now, that said, the Reds have a really young staff. They started a kid yesterday in his major league debut, gave up home runs on his first two pitches. First two pitches. The Diamondbacks, they addressed their bullpen. They acquired Tommy Pham, but they didn't get a starter. They have a lot of young starters as well behind Gallen and Kelly. They needed that. And the Red Sox, I've addressed already. We talked about them. We know they needed starting pitching. In this market, with the supply so limited, and with the rentals, okay, but no top of the rotation difference makers in that group, someone was going to get shut out. Certain teams were going to miss. The Orioles did not miss. They got their guy. The Phillies got their guy. And credit to those teams that did act and get starting pitchers. The Rangers, of course, with Montgomery on top of Scherzer. But it was simple market dynamics that created an atmosphere in which not everyone was going to get what they wanted. And while I'm not excusing the teams that did not get the starting pitching help that they needed, and remember, Dylan Cease, controllable, not traded. Mitch Keller, controllable, not traded. The Seattle youngsters, not traded. So none of those guys went because the prices were so high. And yet, if you're the Reds, you're running out of pitching. If you're the Diamondbacks, you're in that same range. And even the Orioles, sure, they got Jack Flaherty. They're going to have issues in September and maybe October with innings limits and guys getting tired and all of that. They've already demoted Tyler Wells. So the market contributed to a lot of this. And, of course, in some cases, it's fair to criticize the front offices for not having the foresight and maybe the courage to go out and get the starting pitching that they needed. All of this is still yet to play out in full. I always say this about trades. You can't evaluate them in the moment. You can't evaluate them after 2 weeks. And really, the only time you can start evaluating is once the season ends and we know what happened with that particular outcome for that particular team. Did they make the playoffs or not? That said, we've seen some interesting early trends, and we'll be tracking them as the season continues.